Okay, whoops. Okay, I am going to try desperately to stay back here. For those of you who have been to the Launchpad lectures before with me, you know that I'm a wanderer. Normally, I will wander around and talk, and so I'm going to try to stay back here such that I am at least greater than 6 feet away, etc., from everybody, and you'll be able to see my mouth as well. So I know that's trouble for some people when they're doing a lecture. In any case, though, welcome back. As you can tell, we're a little rusty on doing this as well. So it has been a while. We went through some fun with technology and forgetting things like water bottles and some stuff that we normally have always brought. And yeah, in any case, though, we'll probably be much better next month. But that muscle memory for us is just gone, sadly, because we have been away from doing these sort of events for so long. But we're very excited to be back into this. We're starting to do events at the museum and things like that again. We're opening up exhibits, hopefully here very soon. We'll open up the theater again and things like that. But in any case, though, yay, first Launchpad lecture since February of 2020? Was that the last one? March of 2020. So it has been a while. So welcome. For those of you who don't know, my name is Chris Orwell. I'm the executive director here at the museum. The Launchpad lectures are done the first Friday of every month. A bunch of different topics. Keep an eye on our website to know what's coming up and what we'll be doing. There's lots of fun things that we're covering. I'm not the one always lecturing. It might be me, it might be Tony, it might be Dave Dooling who's in the back of the room there. We might have guest speakers in, things like that. So we have our curator, Sue Taylor, etc. We have tons of people who come and speak. So I know that some of you are new, and it's been a while for everybody. So I'm going to do something that I normally don't do at these lectures. So, and one of the other things is that we're testing and using a new system for streaming these broadcasts over YouTube. And so I don't have the advantage of a clicker today. So my clicker is pointing over here at Tony. So in any case, yeah.
And wait a minute.
Wake him up.
It's new technology, so here we go. Okay.
That's not right.
No, that's not right.
That's not right. Nope. There should be some introduction slides on me.
Let's see.
There should be like 6 of them.
We're working on that.
We'll get there. Hey! No, that's not right. Oh, actually, wait, maybe that is. So, no, that is correct. That is correct. So
let's just start
in any case,
No, you were fine. Just hit space.
we'll see what happens now. The next one will be the big telling one. So in any case, my name, like I said, is Chris Orwell. I grew up in Downey, California. Downey was where they built the Apollo Command Module and the space shuttles. They were assembled somewhere else in Southern California, but that's where North American aviation was. And so I kind of grew up around the space industry. So this is actually me. Click again. Right there. Having just shaken John Young's hand. That is my mom right there, who's actually sitting back there in the corner, probably trying to hide right now. But in any case, she used to take me to all the times when the astronauts would come back from their missions and get a chance to shake their hands. The fun thing now, though, is because of this position, I've been able to go from idolizing some of these guys to calling some of them friend and being able to talk with them and things like that. So strange courses through life in any case. Went to the Naval Academy, graduated in 1986. Then I drove submarines around, ballistic missile submarines, attack submarines, small diesel submarines, world's deepest diving submarine, things like that. So that's what I did for my career in the Navy. Retired in 1986 and ended up running the Kansas Cosmosphere and Space Center. Planned a trip for my family to the Cosmosphere because I was teaching at the University of Kansas at the time when I retired. And ended up running the museum through a strange set of circumstances. So did that for almost 6 years, and then came down here to the New Mexico Museum of Space History. This is my family. This is a number of years ago. But in any case, I showed this picture because this is the one that one of my astronaut friends took up to the International Space Station and actually flew this photo up in space. Married to my high school sweetheart, and we have 9 children who are spread all over the world right now. So one of them's even in the Navy. So in any case, next slide. And there they are up in space. That's why I still use that picture, even though it's a number of years old. Okay. I also do a lot of quotes, always interspersed throughout my lectures. The more you come here, the more you'll learn that about me. So in this today, the quotes are all going to come from Gene Roddenberry. So in any case, the first one is, "Time is the fire in which we burn." So In any case, though, we'll see how well Star Trek held up from all of the potential burning from the fire over time. So, whoop. Once again, technology. Got to start with this.
Space, final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore the strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Stop. So, and we all recognize the theme probably after that. It's a very rare American and even person who's grown up on this planet that does not recognize or has not heard that music in some way, shape, or form, or heard some portion of that opening series of lines that William Shatner delivered there. So in his very almost Shakespearean delivery. So in any case, though, next slide. So, if you're going to talk about Star Trek, you got to talk about Gene Roddenberry. So, because Gene Roddenberry is the creator, the genius behind Star Trek and everything that it has become over the years. First, let me step back one moment. A lot of people ask, it's like, why are we covering Star Trek at a space museum? Okay, that is something I'll go into a little bit more at the end of this when I talk about a new exhibit that we're starting up here, which is science fiction and science fact. But a lot of it has to do with the influences that those two arenas have over each other all the time. In any case, though, and I can't tell you the number of people that were influenced to get into engineering, science, space exploration, things like that. Medical, engineering, etc., based on Star Trek and other genres just like it. Gene Roddenberry. Okay, so in any case, though, born in El Paso, Texas. Woohoo! So not too far away. Did not grow up in El Paso. Actually grew up in Los Angeles, California. So grew up reading a lot of pulp magazines. So he was introduced to that whole kind of science fiction and the stories and writing, at an early age. Attended Los Angeles City College. He was dating while he was at Los Angeles City College, Eileen Anita Rexroth. So when you get into him graduating, then he enlists in December 18th, 1941. You got to take a look at, being born in 21, right around that formative time in school. Goes ahead and enlists. He gets married very soon after he enlists, as happened a lot during World War II. No surprise there. People were like, okay, either right before or right after joining the military, people were getting married. So he got married to Eileen right at that point in time. Now, he eventually gets commissioned, so he enlists, he joins as an enlisted person and does get commissioned, and he becomes a pilot. So, flying B-17, the Flying Fortresses. Looks like we're going to have a lot of people. We may be standing room only here in the near future. So, flying B-17s. And during the war, flies 89 combat missions. He is awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He is also awarded an Air Medal. He has a couple of crashes as well. One during the war, and we'll hear about a couple others afterwards. But one during the war, where his B-17 went off the end of the runway. It was found that it wasn't his fault. Sadly, 2 people did die: the bombardier and the navigator, who were in the nose of the plane. But in any case, that was the first of his crashes during his time as being a pilot. In any case, though, so finishes up World War II. At the end of World War II, he gets recruited and joins up with Pan American Airlines. So, and starts flying for them all over the world. So he's a commercial pilot flying all over the world. He does have another crash during his time as a Pan American pilot. So this time, once again, not his fault. Due to a problem with the plane, he does crash the plane, does manage to get it down such that a number of people survive the crash. Not everyone, but some people survive the crash. Leads them, no kidding, out of the desert.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, because they crashed in the desert, and yeah, almost lost our camera there. So, in any case, though, so that was the second of his crashes. So, the third one, just as an FYI, he was a passenger on a plane that crashed. So he survived 3 plane crashes during his life, and still manages to continue on. So kind of, when you take a look back at his history, quite an amazing history, all things considered. Eventually he decides that flying commercial airlines isn't for him. His dad was a police officer. He decides to become a police officer. And so he joins up with the Los Angeles Police Department. So he works traffic for about the first 18 months of his career. Not the most glamorous of things, but then he gets into the public affairs side of the Los Angeles Police Department. So writing, for a newspaper for them, working with the newspapers. He's a technical advisor for the Los Angeles Police Department, working with film and movie companies. As you can imagine, the LA Police Department worked a ton with the movie industry, with the TV industry, and things like that out of Hollywood. So, and he's a speechwriter for the chief of police as well. So, once again, honing all of those writing skills, because he's been, writing and trying to write ever since he was in the Army. He starts truly writing scripts for Hollywood while he's working with the Los Angeles Police Department, and starts actually selling some of them to Hollywood at that point in time. So he's, getting known in the Hollywood community, and eventually he realizes, I could probably make a living writing for the movie and TV industry rather than being in the police department. So he goes ahead and resigns in 1956. So while he was writing with the LA Police Department, he sold stories for Mr. District Attorney, Highway Patrol, I Led 3 Lives, and a number of other shows at that point in time. So after he gets out, the projects that he's working on initially there, the ones listed up here, West Point Story, Harbor Master, Bat Masterson, and some other TV shows as well. Some folks who are a little younger in the audience probably don't recognize any of these TV shows and movies, and that may be an issue. During this whole lecture, I will bring up probably names that younger folks in the audience may not recognize, but in any case, so I'm still going to bring them up. In any case, he eventually starts working with Screen Gems in the late 1950s, and working on projects, like the ones you see up here, Have Gun, Will Travel. This is the first time he gets recognized for his writing. An episode called Helen of Abyginian. In any case, though, gets the Writers Guild Award for the Best Teleplay in 1958. So now he's starting to get recognized as a decent writer as well. Not only is he getting picked up for writing scripts, but he's starting to get recognized for it as well. The Wild Blue is the pilot, the first true pilot that he writes. Now he's trying to not only write for other shows that have already been created, he's trying to create new shows. Wild Blue, guess what? Aviation. A TV show was the concept. Wasn't picked up, but it was the first one that he was really writing. He meets Major Leigh Hudick and DeForest Kelley while he's working during this time, who are working on shows that he is writing for. That name, Major Leigh Hudick, may not sound familiar. Eventually, she becomes Major Barrett, who you may recognize if you're a Star Trek fan. So in any case, though, eventually with Screen Gems, he leaves in 1961 after working on multiple projects. So interestingly enough, once again, being recognized as a writer, he does a Mutual of New York advertisement on TV, the ones where they're sitting in the director's chair and he turns around and does the whole thing, so for Mutual of New York. So he's even getting filmed for, and getting paid for doing a little bit of filming there. And then he starts discussing with some of his friends, fellow writers, an idea about an airship traveling around the world with a diverse crew of people as a TV show and a concept. So just something that's being discussed in this time here, now in the early 1960s. He's working on The Lieutenant, which is on NBC Saturday nights, 7:30 p.m. While he's working on this one kind of matters because while he's working on that, he meets some significant people that eventually are involved with Star Trek. Gary Lockwood, who's in the first episodes, Gene L. Kuhn, who ends up being a producer on the show, Leonard Nimoy, Michelle Nichols, Majel Barrett, who's going by Majel Barrett at this point in time. So, and works with them. So he meets and works with some of these people while working on the TV show The Lieutenant. In March of 1964, this is when we really see the first genesis of Star Trek coming into existence. There's a 16-page pitch paper that he's written that tells about, well, we'll get into it a little bit more here, but the key thing is, on the next slide, but he sends it on the 24th of April. He sends 3 copies and $2 to the Writers Guild of America. Why is that? Because that basically then shows that you have created this. This is what I have created. Nobody else can then plagiarize it, steal it, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it is called Star Trek. Okay, another quote. Star Trek says that it has not happened, not all happened, it has not all been discovered, that tomorrow can be as challenging and adventurous as any time that man has ever lived. Next slide. So the beginnings, we're going to kind of get into the creation of what eventually becomes known as the cage, but this Star Trek concept that eventually gets turned into the first pilot. I always love this. He was the captain of a stellar vessel on its maiden voyage. She was the orphan survivor of a horrible crash. But how could their love survive the private hells of the cage? Very pulpish looking, right? So, yep, in any case. Okay, next slide. So, to understand the creation of Star Trek and how it came to be, we need to know a little bit about Desilu Studios, because they're the ones who basically brought Star Trek into existence. Desilu Studios gets formed in 1950 by these 2 individuals. So Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, Desilu, combination of their 2 names. Studios are formed while they're working on the Lucy, I Love Lucy and things like that, basically to create, produce, and put out the product that is their show. And so married couple in any case. So eventually in 1954 they purchased their first studio. Not the big one that they eventually have, but their first studio. It's at the Motion Picture Center on Cahuenga Boulevard there in Hollywood. And that's where they're shooting I Love Lucy. So now, in 1957, they purchased the old RKO Studios lot and all of the sound stages that go along with that. They now, under their control with all of the production locations that they have purchased in the RKO Studios, they have 33 sound stages. That's 4 more than MGM has, and 11 more than 20th Century had at that point in time. They're one of the big sound studio locations in Hollywood at this point in time. So, and you can see down here, things that were being filmed out there. The Andy Griffith Show, Bing Crosby, Gomer Pyle, My Favorite Martian, et cetera, et cetera. It just kind of, My Three Sons goes on. All the things that were being filmed out there on the sound stages that were part of the Desilu Studios. Eventually, their first big motion picture project is Yours, Mine, and Ours. Lucille Ball was in that movie. In any case, though, so once again, usually projects that they are directly associated with are the big things that they're producing, but there are other entities that are utilizing their sound studios at their studio. In 1960, they divorce. So eventually the marriage is dissolved. In 1962, Desi Arnaz resigns as the president of Desilu Studios, and Lucille Ball takes over as the president. She becomes the first female president of a major motion picture or television studio. And so that's kind of a neat thing to be the first on that one. So series that they end up eventually creating there at Desilu Studios: Mission Impossible, Mannix, and Star Trek in 1966. Eventually in 1967, Desilu Studios is sold to Gulf and Western, which had recently purchased Paramount Pictures, and so then you kind of get the connections in with Desilu, Paramount, etc., that you still see continuing on today. In fact, when we wanted to do an exhibit on Star Trek on the 3rd floor of the museum here, we tried to get permission to do a Star Trek exhibit from Paramount Pictures. We couldn't get it, so we did an exhibit on Gene Roddenberry. In any case, because he was being inducted into our International Space Hall of Fame a number of years ago. That's another story that I'll get into on that one eventually. Next slide. Some pictures here of Desilu Studios, just to be able to see it. Bing, next one. So the interesting thing here is that the back lot, which they used to just call the 40 acres. Some of the fun things on here. The Stalag 13 set from Hogan's Heroes. Down here is his Mayberry. This is the town of Mayberry. The Atlanta train shed from Gone with the Wind. So just some fun stuff that was filmed out there at those studios and the locations where it was. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get back into development of Star Trek, which is going to marry these two together. So Desilu Studios and Gene Roddenberry. In 1964, he came up with the idea. Well, he'd come up with it before that, but he actually proposed the idea for the first time in 1964. The idea was that it takes place on board the SS Yorktown. Captain Robert April is the name of the captain, and it takes place in the 23rd century. He was influenced by some of these folks. These are the ones that he talked about that were influences for the show. A.E. Vought's Space Beagle, the Marathon series, Forbidden Planet, the movie. C.S. Forster's Horatio Hornblower. You can see a lot of that in the Star Trek series if you really take a look at it. And it was described, he described it as a wagon train to the stars. What does that mean? Well, Wagon Train was one of the TV shows, and the key thing about that TV show was it was episodic. In other words, it wasn't, that it was one continuous story. Each episode could stand on its own. It was its own story. So there was a beginning and an end to each episode. And so, with the concept of the wagon train and the travel that it had to do and the exploration, moving out into the unknown, this was essentially Wagon Train to the Stars. It was going to be an episodic show that every week would be on its own, but it would be out in the stars instead of out on the plains, the desert, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in April '64, the draft is presented to Desilu Studios. Why Desilu? None of the big production companies wanted to even think about it. So Desilu was small and independent, still at this point in time. So Desilu is approached. Herbert F. Solow, who's director of production for them, sees the concept and goes, there's something here. There's really something here. In any case, though, and so he goes ahead and signs Gene Roddenberry up for a 3-year production contract. Basically, this is to try and basically you put them under contract for 3 years. You don't know if you're actually going to do it, but you're giving them, a contract to actually try and flesh it out and make it work. So that's what they're trying to do at this point in time. They go ahead and try to present it to CBS, who is, big. Once again, you need to get onto one of the big television stations, at CBS, NBC, ABC, et cetera, who are the only 3 at this point in time. So eventually there's 5 plus, but at that point in time, go to CBS first. CBS doesn't really want to look at it. Actually, they do want to look at it, but they only want to look at it to kind of compare and see what it's going to be in comparison to the show that they're working on production. Anybody know what that was? Lost in Space, exactly. So, Lost in Space, the family adventure going out and getting shipwrecked, essentially. So, which I kind of like to call Swiss Family Robinson to the stars. In any case, though, so Lost in Space is what CBS is working on. They turn it down. So they go to NBC. Grant Tinker, a couple of the other production folks at NBC take a look at it and go, there's something here. We want to try and get into the science fiction adventure realm. Let's go ahead and pick it up. So they decide to go with Star Trek. They commission Desilu and Gene Roddenberry to produce 3 scripts, and they'll pick amongst the 3 which one they want to turn into a pilot. Because remember, once again, generally television, you give somebody money to create a pilot, they create the pilot, then you can take a look at the pilot and see, does this really work? Do we need to make some changes? It gives you an idea, and that's kind of how Hollywood works at doing all this sort of stuff. Of the 3 scripts that are produced, they choose the script for The Cage. Remember, we showed you the picture up there before, so that's the one that they choose. And we'll get into the second pilot about where No Man Has Gone Before eventually, but there is eventually a second pilot. But the first one they choose is The Cage. Next slide. So, The Cage. Oh, I love the pictures that are from the first pilot. In any case, it's chosen. The script is created. They work on it during the summer. In 29 June is when they actually, like I said, selected the script. The filming is actually done between November and December, so that's just kind of why that's up there. So they bring on some consultants and experts. Some of the names that people will recognize. Harvey Lin from the Rand Corporation is a scientific advisor for the series. Matt Jeffries works on production design, and a lot of his stuff creates the world of Star Trek that we know nowadays. In fact, it's actually kind of memorialized in the fact that whenever they have to climb into one of the tubes to do repairs and stuff, that's called a Jeffries tube. So, so if you ever saw, Scotty up in there, working on something, so that was a Jeffries tube. The final script is approved in September of 1964, and they start shooting, or the shooting preps begin in October. Shooting preps meaning They're having to build all the sounds. They're having to build all the sets on the sound stages. They're having to get the special effects material together, which eventually, as you see down here, includes a 11-foot model for the visual effects. So they're building a bunch of that. So, but the shooting preps begin. They're going to do it on the Culver Studios, not in the Desilu Studios at this point in time. They're doing it on NBC's The Culver Studio, stages 14, 15, and 16. Gene Roddenberry hates these studios, and they don't shoot anymore on these after the pilot. The floors were uneven, which makes it difficult to work on all the sets, as you can well imagine, let alone cameras and things like that. They're not soundproof because these stages were built, guess when? In the 1920s, during the silent era. So they didn't have to worry about soundproofing, so you could yell and scream all you wanted to, and it wasn't coming across on the movie screen. So the stages weren't soundproof, which created all sorts of problems for them while they were filming, delays, etc. So eventually, like I said, they don't go back to these stages. The cast is brought in Jeffrey Hunter, Leonard Nimoy, who we worked before, remember, on other films, Majel Barrett. John Hoyt is the doctor in the first episode. Jeffrey Hunter is the lead. The cast is diverse, so you're starting. Gene Roddenberry, one of the things he wanted to do, remember I said it at the beginning, was that it was a diverse crew traveling the world in that first aviation thing. Same thing here on the Star Trek. He wanted it to be a diverse crew that in the future there weren't all the issues that they were going through at the time, that heck, still going through. In any case, though, it was supposed to take 11 days. No, it continued on for 16 days, which you don't think is that much, except for that's like 50% more than what it was budgeted for. So, and the cost just for the filming time was over $164,000. Remember, this is back in the 1960s. So, actually, the entire pilot cost over $630,000 to produce that pilot, with everything included, all of the special effects, production, filming, salaries, all of that stuff. That was the most expensive pilot ever filmed to date at that point in time. So the studio, NBC, is spending $630,000 on producing the first Star Trek pilot, The Cage. In February of once again, visual effects are being worked on during the production during the filming, as well as post-filming in the months afterwards. Eventually, in February of 1965, the finished product of The Cage is delivered to NBC. And they get their first chance to take a look at it. They like it. Interestingly enough, they like it. The descriptions, one of the quotes, the most fantastic thing we've ever seen. They were amazed at the quality, the story, everything. But, next slide. But, The Cage, few issues. They wanted action-adventure. The Cage was, in the sci-fi world, very cerebral. So not a whole lot of action and adventure in the show. Great storyline, great science fiction story, but not necessarily what they needed for a pilot and for a first episode kind of thing. So that was one problem with it, that they were like, that's, we need to see what it's like as far as the action and adventure that can be going on with this show, not just, how can we do as far as the cerebral side of science fiction. They also had a couple other issues. One of the characters, Mr. Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy, had, with the pointed ears and everything, so looked a little demonic. So that was a concern for them. The first officer was female. That was a little bit of a concern for them. And so they had to kind of sit there and say to Gene Roddenberry, we think there's some changes that need to happen, but we think that there's enough here, even though we spent a ton, $630,000, that we want you to film a second pilot. First time ever that they'd done something like that after paying that much money for a pilot. So they do. They commission a second pilot. The second pilot, they ask for 3 scripts. When they get the 3, and I'll get to that here in a second, but they're going to ask for 3 scripts, and they're going to go through this exact same process again. So now I'm just going to get some pictures of, these are some of the production pictures from the Star Trek days. There's the 11-foot model, and some of the folks that had been building it. If you want to see this nowadays, go to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., where it's on display, and it's been recently refurbished, so it is absolutely beautiful. And it changes its look. If you look at it right here, you'll notice that by the time the series actually goes into production, Enterprise looks a little different. So it did. It got changed in between the first pilot, the second pilot, and the first episode of the series. Just some pictures of the production. Spock can smile. I love the backdrops, you know, so you can see where the edge of the studio is, and it starts with the backdrops, you know, the studio wall in there. By the way, all of the, you know, the aliens in the episode, they were ladies, and then they had male voices that came in as the voiceovers for it to give it a very different kind of unsettling feeling to it of females playing males with a male voice. It just looked kind of different, you know. So yep. They were trying to figure out how to create certain special effects, like the beaming up and down on the transporter. This was one of the tests that they were doing, which is why you see all sorts of different colors, you know, and then the outlines with the sparkle effect and things like that. This was one of the tests. The bridge here, you can kind of see they built the bridge so that each of these was a section, so that you can move it around, etc. So each portion of that was a section. But you see little differences between this and what we see eventually in the series, you know, especially the very 1960s looking, you know, bug eye. I kind of like the War of the Worlds, you know, yeah, it's kind of thing. So the sets being built, I love seeing, you know, the stuff like this, the backdrop, you know, with a whole matte painting in the back, the transporter room, which doesn't look like it does, obviously, in the final version. But you can see the elements of it here. Next one. Some scenes that were filmed but not actually in the eventual pilot that went on. So where they were trying to convince him, you have the green girl. I'm just going to say that, you know, kind of. So dancing, which was the next slide. I love the look on this guy's face. The musician sitting here, so absolutely not playing anything, but just kind of staring off, watching it, everything going on. So, next slide. Okay, another Gene Roddenberry quote as we go into here, as we head towards the second episode. They say that 90% of TV is junk, but 90% of everything is junk. Might be true. Really might be true if you think about it. Next slide. Okay, so the second pilot. Once again, they commissioned 3 scripts. The 3 scripts that are presented to them, Where No Man Has Gone Before, Mud's Women, and The Omega Glory. They eventually produced Where No Man Has Gone Before. The other 2, though, you recognize if you're a Star Trek fan, Mud's Women and Omega Glory. Those eventually do get produced. Omega Glory is one of my all-time favorites. It's in my top 10. In any case, though, in July 1965, so if you kind of work out all the dates, is when they start filming the second pilot. They have to redo some of the sets, et cetera, et cetera. So they take this time 9 days for filming. A little bit more efficient. They've done this once already. They're better the second time around. No surprise there. The entire cast, virtually the entire cast is replaced. Leonard Nimoy is the one that they did decide to keep with his demonic look. They decided that actually that did work. But everybody else got replaced. So, you know, and you see some of the major cast members right here. So the captain, William Shatner, gets brought in as the captain. He had acted before, and we'll talk a little bit about each of the cast members here in a bit. He had worked on science fiction before, you know, so with The Outer Limits, he had done Twilight Zone episodes and a number of other sci-fi things. In any case, though, you see George Takei back there. You see James Doohan brought in as the engineer officer. Got a different doctor at this point in time. And by the way, for Kirk, the first people that Gene Roddenberry offered the role to were Lloyd Bridges and Jack Lord. Lloyd Bridges you might recognize from a number of TV shows, Jack Lord, Hawaii Five-0, etc. So, in any case, though, eventually they do settle on William Shatner. Originally, his name is James R. Kirk. They change it to James T. Kirk as the filming goes along. Doohan and Takei are brought on board. They reused virtually all of the sets, props, the uniforms. You can see that these are the ones that were in the original pilot as well. The model's updated, and then NBC sees this and says, "This is what we wanted." and goes ahead and picks it up for the 1966 season. So these are just, once again, some of the shots from the pilot. So I love the velour uniforms, kind of thing. So I always thought that was actually a good look, but changed eventually. By the way, the costumes, they had some issues with that. Star Trek always ran into problems with costs, production costs. It was expensive to produce. They had a limited budget, and so they got creative in some situations and occasionally did stuff they weren't supposed to. And the costumes was one of the areas where they did stuff they weren't supposed to. And what they ended up doing when they were creating the final versions of the costumes and trying to get them there, if they paid the folks who made costumes there in Hollywood, the union members, it would have been very, very, very expensive. They didn't have the budget for that. So they went out to sweatshops, essentially, out in town, had the costumes created at the sweatshops, and then they, no kidding, brought them in through back windows at night into the studio. So, okay. Next slide. More shots from the original episode. I love the crystal eyes. For those of you who may remember it. So now, that theme, which we heard here at the beginning. Couple of things, and these are just intro panels from it. So the first episode of the show for the production for the actual series was the Corbomite maneuver. In any case, though, the theme song that we're also used to hearing, and most everybody, if you hear those first few ding, ding, those few dings, I'm just going to call them, you know exactly what's coming up next. And then it goes through the whole startup, and you get into that very ethereal kind of thing. What do most people think that came from? That sound.
Theremin?
Theremin. Okay, if you've ever heard, who's heard of a theremin here? Out of curiosity. Okay, instrument from 1960. I can't remember. Did I put a slide of it in? Next slide. Nope. Back. I think I forgot to put this. Whoops. Stop. Don't go. Just leave it. Yeah, well, unless you can figure out how to go backwards. So we don't want to go any further. So we missed a quote slide. Sorry about that. In any case, though, the Theremin is a device. It looks kind of like a rectangle, about this size, about that thick, and it's got a big, gigantic wire sticking out from it, and then a pole coming up here. And the performer with it will use two hands. One here is doing volume, and the other here is doing frequency with it. And it was created back in the early 1900s over in the Soviet Union. So a proximity sensor was what it was originally designed for, kind of thing. And they realized making these sounds that you could kind of make music with it. So, and the Theremin was the name of the person who was working on the proximity sensor. In any case, though, nowadays, if you see orchestras will do a Star Trek concert or something like that, and they'll bring somebody out who will play the theremin doing it. But that wasn't what was used to create that. It was actually a soloist singing, a soprano, going in there, and then just with the instruments in the background, it just gives a very ethereal sound. She was up there high, really high, singing that. But that's how it was actually produced. It wasn't done with the theremin. The other interesting thing about the theme song is it has lyrics. So look them up online. In any case, though, anybody know who wrote the lyrics?
Roddenberry?
Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry himself. Why did he write the lyrics, though, is the real question.
Get half the royalties.
Bingo! So they could get half the royalties for every time that song was played. So, which Alexander Courage did not appreciate after writing the music for it, because guess what? You never hear the lyrics. It's because the lyrics, to be brutally honest, stink. They don't match the music. They're not. Just in any case, though. But he did write it so that he would get co-writing credit for it, and he would get half of the royalties for it. In any case, though, the Corbomite maneuver is the first episode in the series. You start to see even more, new crew members brought in. So the Doctor's replaced. You get DeForest Kelly. Lieutenant Uhura comes on board. Yeoman Janice Rand over there. Interestingly enough, you see Uhura's costume here is a little different. She's wearing gold, which she doesn't wear through the rest of the series. So things change, obviously, as the series matures. But in any case, though, the crew is changed out a little bit between the second pilot and when the show goes into production. So, and some of that just had to do with the way the actors, they said, not exactly right, and some of the times it was just who was available, you know, in some of those situations. And like I said, I'll get into a little bit more about each of the main characters of the show here in a bit. I do want to emphasize this. If we were to talk about all things Star Trek, we'd be here for like a whole semester's worth of classes and lectures and everything else like that. This is literally just the creation of the series that I'm kind of going into. So, because we are literally in the 55th anniversary year for that. Next slide. Some pictures from the Corbinite maneuver. I love this. Anybody know who that is? Clint Howard, Ron Howard's brother. Yep. So, in any case, though, so who played that character in the Corbinite maneuver? Next slide.
Uh-oh.
We'll get there.
Blame Windows.
Woo! So,
Move your cursor.
so, you know, and just a couple of shots here, and some of these shots obviously are from later on, you know, in seasons. Obviously, we're in season 2, 3, you know, kind of thing. So, because we got Chekhov, he didn't come in until season 2. In any case, though, but just showing some of the sets, like the hallway. You know, so in the sets were built right next to each other. Bridge here, hallway, engineering here, quarters, doctor's office, laboratory, etc. Everything was all nice and compact in there, so that's just kind of what the layout was. On Sound Stage 9, now they're over at Desilu Studios. At Sound Stage 9 is where they started filming it. Actually, 9 and 10, just so you know. Next. Here's a top-down look at the stage, and remember, each of these segments is completely removable, you know, if they need to or wanted to or had to make a change or anything else like that. Next slide. Filming the Enterprise, you know, with the blue screen background there. Shots of it moving around, etc. The 11-foot model. Next slide. Sets, the way that they did this, they just hanged up. Wow. They just hung up large curtains in the background there and then hit it with different colors for different atmospheres on different planets, and then just changed the layout of the rocks and dirt and everything else. This was all done over at Soundstage 10, all of the landscapes. That's also where the shuttlecraft was and things like that. Next slide. Just a couple shots. You know, there's the different colored background. And if you remember Star Trek, one of the things about it that was fascinating was how colorful the show was. That will come into play. How colorful the show was. Ha-ha! Yeah. Bada bing! Hey, Paramount Pictures, RCA, directly involved with Paramount Pictures. And so Star Trek, color. Star Trek was the most popular color TV show on the air. And so, needless to say, it helped sell a lot of color TVs, because you could watch it in color. Very colorful. When you're first in color TV, there's got to be a reason. And they were talking about both the show and the product being the RCA TVs. So, next slide. A man either lives his life as it happens to him, meets it head on and licks it, or he turns his back on it and starts to wither away. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit about each of the main characters. And I'll get a little bit into Star Trek, it being canceled and stuff like that towards the very end. So William Shatner is chosen as Captain James Tiberius Kirk, James T. Kirk. Shatner was born in 1941, in March of 1941, up in Montreal. He's a Canadian. In any case, though, Jewish household was what he grew up in. So you're going to see, actually, that kind of plays out through Star Trek a little bit here. It's kind of funny. So his grandparents immigrated from the Soviet Union, from the Ukraine, came over to the United States. So the Russian, Ukrainian, as it were, background in his family. In any case, though, eventually he graduates from McGill University in 1952, and then he ends up with the Canadian Repertory in Ottawa, is really his first, acting gig. He's a classical Shakespearean actor, and so the roles that he's doing are various, Shakespearean plays. He has his Broadway debut, though, in 1956. He's an understudy. Anybody know who he's an understudy to in Henry V? Christopher Plummer,
Oh, my.
who he eventually stars with in one of the movies. In any case, though, he's an understudy to Christopher Plummer. And one night, guess what? Christopher Plummer is sick. So William Shatner has to go on and play Henry V. Plummer praised Shatner for his performance because he didn't copy Plummer. He actually, the way Plummer acted out large portions of it, Shatner went the opposite direction on purpose to try and show that, you know, it could be done a bit differently as well. And Plummer actually praised him quite significantly for that. So he's starting to get a little bit more known in the stage world at this point in time. He picks up, he's got a gig eventually in 1954. He's Ranger Bob on Howdy Doody. That comes into play for another one of the actors eventually as well. So in 1958, he gets his first big acting role in The Brothers Karamazov. In any case, though, and does a ton of TV through the 1950s and early 1960s, where he's starring in episodes, and I mentioned just a couple of them with The Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, but he's on tons and tons of TV. So he was known as, his motto at that point in time was work equals work. You work hard, you're going to get work. So he was known, the quote about him was that he would show up on time, he worked hard, always answered his phone, and knew his lines. And so the problem is that he did take some roles that he shouldn't have, which kind of sometimes in the Hollywood world can lessen your prestige and can lessen your, you know, how you're seen, etc. So in any case, though, he had worked with Roddenberry before, when Roddenberry was working as a scriptwriter. And so, you know, after going through Lloyd Bridges, Jack Lord, etc., he knew that Shatner was also a viable choice for the captain of the Enterprise, and he gets selected as it. So, and kind of rest is history as far as that goes. Interestingly enough, Shatner runs into the same problem that many of the actors from Star Trek do after the series is canceled, after the 3 seasons. He's very typecast at that point in time, and has struggles to find work. Very much struggles to find work, to the point where in the early 1970s, he's living in a camper in the San Fernando Valley and taking odd jobs just to keep his family fed. In any case, yeah, he describes it as a somewhat dark time, as many of the actors did. A number of them struggled with that. In any case, next slide. Trouble with Tribbles episode. Next slide. Shot during the, as you get into the motion pictures. And then next slide. And here he is recently, just in the last month or so, a couple of months, flying after when he flew up to the International Space Station. Wow, I almost said that. Flew up in a suborbital flight with Blue Origin here, not just a couple hours away. Okay, next slide. The human race is a remarkable creature, one with great potential, and I hope that Star Trek has helped to show us what we can be if we believe in ourselves and our abilities. Next slide. Leonard Nimoy. Yee! So, in any case, though, born in 1931, passed away in 2015. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts, Jewish immigrant family. His parents came over, guess where? Ukraine area. Okay, the Ukraine region. So, in any case, though, his mom actually was hiding under bales of hay as they were escaping the Soviet Union. So, his dad was a barber, his mom was a homemaker. He worked a lot of odd jobs to support his family while he was growing up, selling greeting cards, shining shoes, rearranging and setting up chairs in theaters, and eventually he becomes a vacuum cleaner salesman.
Kirby.
So, in any case, though, he was also a singer in the synagogue, so he had a very nice voice, and so he did a lot of that. He worked in local theater during this time frame. And then from 1953 to 1955, he served in the Army Special Services in their film division. So as he gets out of the Army, his wife is pregnant with their second child. He has to go and start driving a cab in the Los Angeles area. He decided the Los Angeles area was where he wanted to be. He wanted to try and get into the film and acting industry. He started taking a lot of B parts in shows, movies, everything else. Eventually he realizes, he tries to do leading roles, but it's not his forte. He's a good supporting actor, but he's not the best leading actor, and he realizes that. So, and his quote about himself: "I'm a second child who was educated to the idea that my older brother was to be given respect and not perturbed, and I was not to upstage him. So my acting career was designed to be a supporting player and a character actor. So in any case, so he starts taking on a lot of these secondary roles. So and doing them. So eventually, once again, he's worked with Roddenberry before. He gets cast into the original Star Trek pilot, and the rest is history. I'll leave that as well. So one of the interesting things, this. Okay, that symbol. Anybody know where that came from? Yes.
Okay, so during his bar mitzvah, there was a point in time when the rabbi had his hands on Nimoy's back, and he wasn't supposed to look at the rabbi, but he went ahead and took a peek. The rabbi was doing that symbol on his back. So that's where you took that from.
Yeah, very, during a Jewish ceremony. Yep. So there was a portion of it when his father told him, you're not supposed to look at the priests, etc. So because they were using a symbol for the name of God. So, and this was the symbol that they were using at that point in time. So, in any case, though, so that's and the spoken blessing said, in Hebrew was live long and prosper as well. So, in any case, that's where that came up with. He also came up with the Vulcan nerve pinch because he was supposed to knock somebody out with the butt of a phaser pistol. And he said, yeah, that's a little rough for Spock. And so he said, hey, I got a better idea. And he originally proposed it, and they're like, yeah. So he worked with William Shatner, where he would pinch Shatner, and Shatner would go down, and then they showed them that, and they're like, oh, actually that's good. So that's how the Vulcan nerve pinch actually came into existence. Next slide. The look, the Spock look. Playing his music, and he sings in the series. Once again during the movies, and that leaves us with one of our most famous lines. So, needs of the not waiting, many outweigh the few. Okay. And then a little bit more recently, so before he passed away. So, in any case, though, so there's Leonard Nimoy. Next. So, actually, I forgot. I put this in as well. So, yeah, some of my favorite episodes of The Big Bang Theory. So, with Sheldon with the toy transporter, and Spock giving him advice, etc., etc. So, yep. Next slide. It has become a crusade of mine to demonstrate that TV not need to be violent to be exciting. Next slide. Jackson DeForest Kelly, known as D to everybody who's filming with him. So in any case, born in January of 1920, passed away in 1999. He was born in Toccoa, Georgia. For those of you who've seen the Band of Brothers show, Toccoa may sound familiar, so they did training around that area. So he was delivered in his house by his uncle, who was a doctor. In any case, though, his father was a minister. He wanted to become a doctor, but the family couldn't afford medical school. I'm surprised there. So, in any case, though, he'd spent a lot of time singing on the local radio station, singing in the church. A very passable singer as well. Eventually, in 1934, they moved to Decatur, Georgia, and in the 1940s, he starts getting into acting and starts getting movie roles. Actually, so in fact, he was almost cast as the lead in The Gun for Hire, which Alan Ladd ended up starring in. So. From 1943 to 1946, he ends up in the Army Air Forces in their motion picture unit. Notice a theme here happening. A lot of actors ended up in the motion picture industry for the armed services during World War II. And then after the war, moved to LA and got picked up by Paramount for a contract from a scout who had seen him in a Navy training film. And so he starts, once again, taking a lot of jobs, especially in the Westerns. He was known as a Western actor, and so he picks up a lot of jobs in acting. So, interestingly enough, in 1956, 9 years before being cast as Dr. McCoy, Kelly played a small supporting role as the medic in The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, in which he utters the diagnosis, "This man's dead, Captain." And that man is dead, to Gregory Peck in it. So. In any case, though, so many years before he said, "He's dead, Jim." So he was saying it in other Hollywood productions. Interestingly enough, one of the things that he stated the year before his death is that his legacy would be the many people that McCoy had inspired to become doctors. That's something that very few people can say that they've done, and I'm proud to say that I have. So, in any case, he was very proud of that fact. Okay, a couple of shots here from the motion picture in the 70s. Next slide. Same thing. Okay, next slide. Quotes. So, actually, I'm going to skip over this for the moment. Next slide. Okay, I believe in humanity. We are an incredible species. We are still just a child creature. We're still being nasty to each other. And all children go through those phases. We're growing up. We're moving into adolescence now. When we grow up, man, we're going to be something. Okay, next slide. So, whoops. Got my pieces of paper backwards. James Doohan, born in 1920, passed away in 2005. His parents came from Northern Ireland, the Bangor area over there, and then moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, so another Canadian actor on the show. His dad was a pharmacist, a vet, a dentist at various and assorted times. Eventually moves to Sarnia, Ontario. He goes to a tech school there. He excels at science. He excels at math, things like that. Sets him up well to be eventually playing an engineer. He joins the Cadet Corps for the Canadian Air Cadet Corps in 1938. In World War II, he ends up being an artillery and infantry officer. He actually goes over to England in 1940. He sees his first combat on D-Day at Juno Beach, storming Juno Beach, and fighting there and leading his men. One of the evenings, going between locations, two of the posts, there is a skittish guard at one of the locations that panics when he sees Doohan approaching and starts opening fire. And he shoots him 5 times. So, actually 6 times, 6 times. 1 in the chest, 4 in the leg, and 1 blows off his right middle finger. So he can't give anybody the bird anymore after that one. So, in any case, though, which he hid very well during the productions and things like that. So, but he was missing the middle finger on his right hand. So, after recovering from that, he becomes an air observation pilot and starts flying as well. So he's got a flying career. After the war, he goes to London, Ontario, goes back to school, he's listening to one radio drama and says, I could do better than that. And he starts doing it, starts doing voices. He's known for doing accents, is one of the key things. And if you go back and listen to some of his stuff, he could do tons and tons of different accents. He gets picked up for the Neighborhood Playhouse. And gets a scholarship to that in New York City. And some of his classmates, Leslie Nielsen, Tony Randall, Richard Boone. He ends up being Timber Tom on Howdy Doody. And, is obviously very well known for those accents. And one of the things, when they were trying to get him, when they were trying him out, auditioning for the role, they were, for the engineer, they were saying, do different accents. And he did tons of them. And they said, well, what do you think? And he says, well, quote, if you wanted to be an engineer, in my experience, the best engineers are Scotsmen. And so they had him do a Scottish accent. He did it. They liked it. They chose it. The Montgomery Scott is named after his grandfather. That's where that name came from. And his description of himself was Scotty is 99% James Doohan and 1% accent. Next slide. Next. To be different is not necessarily to be ugly. To have a different idea is not necessarily to be wrong. The worst possible thing is for all of us to begin to look and talk and act and think alike. Next slide. Nichelle Nichols. Born in 1932 in Robbins, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. Her dad's a factory worker. He becomes the mayor and the chief magistrate there in Robbins. Eventually they move into Chicago. She studies in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. She gets into theater, a lot of the theater there in Chicago. She ends up being in a musical called Kicks and Company that is a parody of Playboy and some of the things involved with Playboy. Actually, Hugh Hefner saw her in this and actually picked her up for the Playboy Club in Chicago. So she did a stint at the Playboy Club there as well. But she continues doing the acting, Carmen, Porgy and Bess, so starts getting in and doing TV roles as well. And eventually tries out for Star Trek and gets picked up for the role of Uhura on Star Trek. During the first year of the series, she was unhappy and thought that she was kind of wasting her time. And I'm going to read you some of the stuff here. She actually went to Gene Roddenberry's office, and towards the end of season, she turned in her resignation letter and said, "I don't want to do this anymore." And Gene talked to her, did not want to lose her, thought that she was perfect, obviously, for the role. Tried to talk her out of it, and eventually convinced her to wait through the weekend, and then come back to me on Monday. If you still want to leave, we'll go ahead and let you leave, no problem. That weekend, she has a speech to give, or she's attending a banquet that was being run by the NAACP, and she's informed that a fan really wants to meet her, and so she thinks it's a Trekkie, trekker kind of thing. So she said sure. She looks across the room, and the person she sees coming up to her that they're bringing to her, anybody know who it was? Dr. Martin Luther King. So, yes, and he says to her, "Yes, Ms. Nichols, I'm your greatest fan." He said that Star Trek was the only show that he and his wife, and this is from her biography, Coretta, would allow their 3 children to stay up and watch. She told King about her plans to leave the series because she wanted to take a role that was tied to Broadway. I never got to tell him why, because he said, "You cannot. You cannot. For the first time on television, we will be seen as we should be seen every day, as intelligent, quality, beautiful people who can sing, dance, and go to space, who are professors and lawyers." He went on further, saying, "If you leave, that door will be closed because your role is not a black role and it's not a female role. He can fill it with anyone." In any case, though, so yeah, that turned her around very rapidly. She went to Roddenberry, told him all about it on Monday, and Roddenberry was in tears. In any case, though, so she stayed with the series, thank God, at that point in time. So, next slide. Here's the gold uniform. Plato's Stepchildren, quote, cited as the first interracial kiss between an African American and a Caucasian on broadcast TV. There were other interracial kisses before this, different races and everything that you take a look at, but this was really, truly the first one. They're quote unquote forced into it. There were, there's been statements that they didn't kiss, et cetera, et cetera. And Nichelle Nichols always says, yeah, they kissed multiple times. They were supposed to film it both as a kiss and as that they didn't kiss and that they resisted it. Shatner and her agreed, and they hammed it up and faked it away when they were not supposed to kiss, such that they couldn't use those takes. And the film crew eventually said, yeah, we just got to leave it, because NBC was a little concerned. I think, do I have the quote here? Yeah. They got tons of mail about it afterwards, so most of it all positive, no surprise. But I love this one letter. This was also from her biography. Somebody from the South wrote, "I am totally opposed to the mixing of the races. However, anytime a red-blooded American boy like Captain Kirk gets a beautiful dame in his arms like that Uhura, he ain't gonna fight it."
Wow.
Horribly inappropriate, but so, in any case, yeah, so. Okay, next slide. From the motion picture. Next slide. She started doing a lot of work with NASA. Okay, so from 1977 all the way up, through 2015, she's still been doing stuff. Here she is in mission control. Next slide. Here she is on the Sophia aircraft.
Oh, wow.
This is fun for us here at the museum. Next slide. Here she is. She's on the Sophia aircraft, which is an airborne observatory kind of thing. So, this individual right there is sitting right there.
Michael.
So, Mike Shinneberry, one of our educators, so was on the mission as well. Next slide. George Takei. So, we got 2 more to go. So, born 1937. His dad was in real estate. He was named after King George VI, because it was right around the time of King George's coronation. They ended up in relocation camps during World War II in both Arkansas and California. After the war was over and they were released, they essentially lost everything. And so they ended up living on Skid Row in LA, which is not a nice area kind of thing. Lived there for about 5 years. Eventually working their way back up through scholarships and everything else. He ends up attending UC Berkeley. He ends up, and UCLA. First he starts off in architecture, then eventually he gets his major in theater. He gets a master's of art in theater as well in 1964. So we're heading very quickly into the Star Trek era. He performs at the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford, also at the Sophia University in Tokyo. And eventually starts working in the Desilu workshops, sort of like the Playhouse theaters and stuff like that. So, and that's where he gets connected into to the Star Trek world. Next slide. Dagger of the Mind. So, and he's got a little bit of a feud going on with William Shatner right now. So, I'll let you read about that stuff online. So, and that's been going on for ages. And then Walter Koenig. So, In any case, though, Chicago, Illinois, born in 1936. His dad was a businessman. They ended up moving to Manhattan. Once again, Russian Jewish immigrants coming to the United States from Lithuania, that region over there. So the original name of the family was Königsberg, and they changed it to Koenig to kind of Americanize it, as it were. This happened. He attends Grinnell and then UCLA. Notice a lot of UCLA folks involved with all of this. He gets a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. One of his professors tells him to look into acting, and so he does. He ends up getting picked up for the neighborhood playhouse, the School of the Theater, and his classmates, Dabney Coleman, Christopher Lloyd, and James Caan.
Wow.
Good company, good company. So, and then in '63 and '64, he ends up with roles on the TV show The Lieutenant. That ought to sound familiar from some of the background with Shatner. And so he ends up getting known. And during the second season is when they bring him on board. A couple of reasons. One, George Takei was going to be working with the Green Berets, the John Wayne film, and so he was going to be gone for about half the season. So they needed somebody to come in. They also wanted to try and appeal to a younger audience. And you notice a kind of a, next slide, Beatle-ish look to Walter Koenig. So in any case, they did that on purpose with the hair mop. So next slide. And next slide. More recent Star Trek. Yep. Next slide. I just love that. So, you know, the new uniforms mixed with the old uniforms from the original pilot. Next slide. And then just some fun shots. We're going to go through these fairly quickly. The chess set, scenes from filming, you know, looking at Mad Magazine, who had done a parody of them, eating on the set. Once again, Spock smiles in front of his car. The set, hopefully this guy was out of frame. Why are we now going into space? Well, why did we trouble to look past the next mountain? Our prime obligation to ourselves is to make the unknown known. We are on a journey to keep an appointment with whatever we are. Gene Roddenberry. Next slide. Aha. Even after the series ended, remember the series only went for 3 seasons. In any case, though, eventually, you know, there's write-in campaigns to keep the show going that are highly successful. They do keep it going. Eventually, it does get canceled. It gets put on the last season. It gets put into the Friday night slot at 10 o'clock. Ow. You know, so interesting its ratings. It depends on how you look at them as far as how well you think it did. But the bottom line is that really in syndication is when it came into its own. It did have a very loyal fan base, still does today, as is evidenced by this room, in any case, and anytime you look at anything online. So that loyal fan base not only helped it to stay on for the extra seasons, but also helped NASA change NASA's mind about the name of their first shuttle. And so the first shuttle ended up being named the Enterprise, so because of that. Next slide. And then a couple of shots from the movie, the motion picture. Eventually, it does get picked up. They think about doing a series after popularity really does start increasing. But in the end, they decide that motion pictures is the better route to go. And so they start off with Star Trek, the motion picture. A couple of shots from that. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, once again, that's it. Next slide. I just had to throw this one, even though this isn't Star Trek Motion Picture, this is the Wrath of Khan, but I love the Herbie Villachet face taped onto the little blow-up thing next to it there, so, with Ricardo Montalban. So. Next slide. Star Trek has created a universe, big universe. Star Trek, which has created afterwards the animated series, the motion picture, and all the motion pictures that followed on, all 6 of them. Star Trek The Next Generation, then Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, the Star Trek reboot series that has come back now with the Kelvin timeline. Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and coming up, Strange New Worlds. Is going to be released in the near future. So tons and tons of TV. Star Trek's pretty much on all the time now, either in syndication or on shows that are coming out. Next slide. So, part of the reason why we have done this lecture is that we have that Gene Roddenberry exhibit, the floor above us here, so and after we finish here, you can kind of wander on up and take a look at it. as part of that, in the back area, we have a transporter. We have props from the original TV show. We have an original Tribble. This isn't an original Tribble. Don't freak out, Smithsonian. So the original Tribble's under a case, So in any case, up on display and things like that. But the exhibit's been up for a while, been very popular, but it was a little, you're like, we got to replace that at some point in time. And so we said, well, we want to keep maybe the back portion of it, because that's very popular. People like to stand in the transporter, et cetera. But how do we keep that and update it? So we thought about it and came up with the concept of the sci-fi and sci-fact. So science fiction and science fact and how they're constantly influencing each other. And so as part of that, we're going to be able to not only keep the Star Trek portion in the back, but add to it with a whole bunch of other genres as well. So there are things, Stranger Things, Joyce's costume from Stranger Things, Mal's costume from Serenity and Firefly, Galaxy Quest uniform, Piece of the Death Star, TV show Eureka, Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence's costumes from the movie Passengers, Long Bar Stools. A lot of the props kind of showing, once again, mixing in Hollywood, real life, technical books, first editions of From the Earth to the Moon, from Jules Verne, things like that. And then we're going to constantly show, maybe through equipment, so where we may have even, things, like, this, and showing compared to communications devices today, tricorders, things like that. So all sorts of fun stuff like that in this new exhibit that we're going to open up in the spring. And so that's when we're looking to open it up, and we're still gathering stuff. In fact, actually, I'm going to be out in California next week picking up some items. The half-scale model of the Mercury capsule from the movie The Right Stuff, a piece of V'ger, 5-foot-tall chunk of V'ger from Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and then costumes from the movie Starship Troopers, worn by Denise Richards and some of the other stars from that show. So we're constantly collecting more and more and more and more items. So just letting you know that that's coming down the pipe. Next slide. Just a thought. Earth is the nest, the cradle, and we will move out of it. I love showing, shots. This is perseverance and ingenuity. We got a helicopter operating on Mars. Is that cool or what? So, in any case, though, next slide. One more thing. I always finish with this one. Naval Academy graduate, got to put it up there. Okie doke. Questions? Next slide. And feel free, if you've had enough of sitting or whatever, so to get up and walk away or anything like that. So,
I had always hoped that they closed down the shuttle program, and they were sending them out.
yes.
I was hoping they would bring one here.
They wouldn't. We don't have the population base. They needed to go out to geographic and population, heavier populated areas. Hence the reason, and a couple of areas. Smithsonian obviously was going to get one.
Yeah.
Kennedy obviously was going to get one. They were built in. They need one on the West Coast. So it was an issue between Boeing, Seattle area, LA area. LA area was where they were built, so they put it, in the LA area as well. And then, New York, very obviously, once again, due to population, location, and where the population centers are. We were never in the running. So.
But they did fly over the city.
Yeah, oh yeah, they flew over, they did a tour over the entire United States, yep, so.
I bring that up because my mom and I are both huge Star Trek fans. We were just sitting around talking politics. We heard of something flying over. We didn't actually go out. We just
Yep.
And then we found out it was the Endeavor, and then it was like,
Yep.
my mom was the spot for like 2 days.
Yep. Other questions?
There is a great episode of the 1950s radio program Suspense that you can find on YouTube, and it's called The Flesh Peddler, and it's about an agent who goes deep into the freak show, the circus freak show, and it stars DeForest Kelly. And it also features Dolly Butler.
Yeah.
So it's really good.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was going to do eventually. When I had that quotes thing up there, I was going to do favorite quotes from Star Trek, and we won't get into that because we'd be here for forever. So.
An unusual Star Trek spinoff or a bit of legacy is that the Coast Guard patterned the bridge of their Bear-class medium endurance cutters after the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yep.
But they did have one thing the Enterprise didn't have: coffee cup holders.
Oh, God. Yeah. I was going to say seat belts at first, you know, so I knew that they did put those on there. I've been on the bear class, so. I'm going to actually end it right there, so thank you very much for coming today. Actually, Kathy, do you have announcements? Sorry.
Well, yes, I do.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you all so much for coming here today. We really appreciate your continued support of the museum and our Launchpad lecture series. The next Launchpad lecture will be held on Friday, first Friday in December, on December 3rd. And the topic will be SpaceX Starship to orbit and beyond. Also, if you have young kids, and not terribly young, grade levels 2 through about 7 or 8, we are sponsoring our Popular Science Saturday programs now at Pizza 9. Before they open in the mornings on Saturday, the second Saturday of each month. The next one is November 13th. It begins at 10 a.m., lasts for about an hour, and it is free to attend. So we invite you to both of those things, and thank you.
And if anybody wants to see it after the lecture is done, I have an original script from The Trouble with Tribbles signed by David Gerald up here that you can come on up and take a look at if you want. Thank you very much.